Welcome back to a new episode of the Threshold Lab. And as I've noticed that I typically, if you've been tuning into the show, every guest that I brought on, I think I've been adamant from the get-go of how excited I've been, how much I've been looking forward to the conversation. Now, today's guest is no different than that, but I also really want to emphasize how excited I am because Cody Royle, our guest today, is somebody who I've greatly admired his work for years now. I think we share a lot of areas of passion, especially as it relates to coaching and how to support and guide coaches. And so this was a conversation that I've had starred for a bit. He's somebody that I've had in mind for quite a while, and I'm excited because not only can he speak to principles and frameworks and systems that coaches can implement to become better versions of themselves and master their craft. And also, he has worked with a lot of coaches, head coaches at the elite level, and he is guiding coaches every single day to this day in this space. So I'm just really excited to bring all that full circle and to spend some time with you today, Cody. So I appreciate you taking some time out of your schedule to do so.
Of course, Zach, it's great to see you again. We saw each other about this time last month and chatted for about an hour. And I think after that, I said, geez, I wish we had recorded that. So this is our opportunity.
Exactly. I felt very similar. I remember leaving the conversation and I didn't want to be rude during it and take a bunch of notes. And after it ended, I was going through and adding a bunch of things in my phone. So I think some of those are going to be things that we double tap on in today's conversation. But Cody, where I think is a good place to start, I know I expressed this to you, is I first heard you speak about a lot of the work that you're now doing and something that you're really passionate about in coaches being performers too, and the importance of investing in the development and the craft of coaching. And I first heard that in 2019 at a leaders summit in Las Vegas. Now at the time, however, you were still the head national team coach for the Aussie Rules football team and for Team Canada. So you were still in the midst of being a full-time coach in that regard as well. But where I'd actually like to start is where the seed maybe was planted for you, that it's important for coaches to view themselves as performers and to develop themselves as such.
Yeah. I mean, the real maybe catalyst or the thing that reinforced even that presentation happened shortly after that, in what would have been, I think, March the following year, so early 2020. One of our players took his own life, and so all the things that I had presented kind of came to the fore. Is like, this figure that people are looking to for leadership and guidance around this life event, and trying to guide 50 young men through that whilst also trying to get through it, and really kind of took its toll emotionally on me. And so I kind of knew the technical elements of what I was talking about, in terms of I'd been to tournaments, I played 5 games in 13 days with a team in Australia and lived in the hotels and done all that. I knew the technical elements, but where it really kind of hit home for me was going through that situation. And then that's the event that kind of created the second book, which is The Tough Stuff, which is really what shot me into doing this as work. But I think even when I presented to you, I still had a lot to learn about what I was presenting. And it didn't happen too long after that.
Something that I think is very common for people to get asked is, hey, if you could kind of go back in time and give advice to your younger self, or that version of you that was navigating that experience and being the leader of your team in 2020 during that time, it's very easy to point towards what advice you might give. Maybe on the flip side of that, are there any questions that you wish somebody had been asking you in that period to kind of now maybe you still might have got to the same path and the same destination, but are there questions that in retrospect you wish others had been asking you sooner in your coaching career?
Not so much questions. I think what I was searching for during that time was just anything to do with what I was feeling during that particular time. And part of the reason for creating or writing the tough stuff was that I found nothing. So I was like, there's this whole kind of element of the lived experience of this role and going through these kind of challenges, and that's only one challenge that would generate that kind of lived experience. But I really found nothing to do with emotion in coaching, and so maybe the question is just, how are you doing? Like, honestly, that you work with enough coaches, it's like people don't even do that. Like, how are you doing? And not just taking the, oh, I'm fine, brush it away. No. Like, how are you actually doing? Because you are a performer as well, and you're accountable to players that need you to be close enough to your best and not kind of going through your own turmoil, so you can help them be at their best. So maybe that's the question, but I just found no resources about the emotional side of what we do, of just elite leadership in general. I found that to be completely missing from almost anywhere I looked.
I think something that's become so commonplace in the realm of coaching is just because it's oftentimes filled with so many high achievers, people that want to be great, people that are competitive, and people that, as human beings in general, were really good at just grinding through things. And to your point of either avoiding, disregarding, compartmentalizing emotions, and not even taking a moment to truly check in with them. Not just even sometimes for others, but especially for ourselves. And so, how much of that do you feel like was aligned with your experience at the time, where you just get so focused on the craft itself that it took a moment like that in 2020 for you to actually take a step back? And I'm just curious if that was for you, what your experience as was, and also if it's something that you still come across regularly in those that you're now coaching.
Yeah. The situation that I went through, I would say, would be the first time that I ever asked for help. I can give you a specific example. I contacted 3 people specifically. I sought them out deliberately because I thought that they would be able to certainly empathize and understand like the dynamic of the role that I was in and the weight that that would carry with it, given what I was going through, but also just wouldn't kind of brush away and be like, "Oh, don't feel like that. Like, you don't need to carry that with you," because I didn't want that advice. But I would say probably almost in my life, that was the first time that I actually ever sought out help for something that I was going through, and deliberately contacted specific people that I thought could help me. But otherwise, I didn't have the tools. I come from a country where, when we were growing up in Australia, you didn't ask for help. We're very much just to get on with it kind of culture, at least when I lived at home. I played a sport where there's 18 of us out on the field at the same time, Aussie rules football, and it's very much team oriented. It's very much you'll play through injuries, you'll play through, it's all about the team. And if they need you to go out there and get hit and sacrifice your own well-being for the team, is like you're actively willing to do it. And plus, I'm a man, and so we haven't been taught the skills to ask for help socially either. And so, like, all the reinforcement in my life up until that point was kind of had taught me not to ask for help. And that's what I mean. I think it's the first time in my life that I actually sorted out, other than going to my mum and my grandpa and things like that, but to go beyond my family dynamic and say, call someone and say, man, I need to talk to you. I need some help. That would have been, 2020. So I was, 36 years old or something. And I've never asked for help.
I'm I'm making a bit of an assumption that some of that is obviously driven by the magnitude of the situation and what was experienced for not just you, but also your team. And also though, within that, what made that particular moment different than others when it came to this is actually the time now where I'm going to actually not just have the thought that I might need some help, but I'm also going to put that out there and ask it.
Everything else in coaching, I felt prepared for. Like I might not have been good at it, but I knew that I needed to do that, or that this was the way forward, or this was the path, or we're going to have to go through something here, but I know that at the other end we'll come out here. I was about 15 years in to my coaching career, even in my late 30s, right? I started very early, and so the preparedness allowed me to kind of take on things that, even though I might not have been good at them, I knew that I had an idea of what to do. That was not the case with what I went through. Literally, the question that I asked the people that I called for help is, what do I do here? Like, I don't know. Felt so in over my head at that time that's why I kind of had to reach out, because I just needed someone to tell me what to do. Felt I was prepared enough to deal with whatever we were going through, but then that was really challenged.
Mm. I want to kind of know, so this all unfolds 2020, and then it's that following year when you transition from your full-time role as again being the head coach for Team Canada and Aussie Rules football, correct? And
Yep.
so within that, maybe now let's kind of flash forward a little bit and maybe kind of walk us through what had transpired from that moment till officially transitioning out of your role. Kind of what did that look like for you? What did that feel like for you? And just kind of where were you at in that time?
Yeah, so I'd been with the national team for 9 years, and so part of the reality probably was that I was on my way out anyway, in that I was holding on for. We were about to go to the what we call the International Cup, which was about 20 something countries go to Australia and have a big World Cup tournament, and it was tri-annually. So went in 2017 and was getting them ready for 2020, and that was due to happen in June. And then I was going to start a family and all of those things, so that was kind of the plan. That happened in the March. April, COVID hits, and it kind of continued along that path, because then I started asking my friends in coaching, like, how are you doing? Because everyone's forgotten the early days of COVID in sport. It was dire. All the leagues were going to collapse because the TV revenue wasn't going to come in, because the games weren't going to be on television. And there was only so much float in some of these leagues to keep the thing alive. So everyone kind of every coach in the world had their like come to Jesus moment while they're sitting out in their backyard being like, holy shit, like this might not be a thing at the end of this. Like, my coaching career, my professional career might be over. These sports might not make it. Who am I? What skills do I have? Can I do another job? Do I want another job? Do I like my wife? Do I like my husband? Do I like my kids? Do I want to spend time with, like, it all just came like out in this really short period of time. And within 6 months of like going through what I was going through, and then everyone going through this kind of epic scale search for what it was all about, ended up, I wrote a book about it. Tough stuff. All of that kind of content came from what everyone was going through at that same time, which was the year of 2020. And then, I started to get contacted daily by people who had read that book after it was released. And messages were just, I need to talk to you. I need you to work with me on what you've written about. It was just a groundswell that was, I couldn't ignore. And so, I was fortunate enough that I was in a position to be able to kind of start to take some of that on and build it slowly, while I was still doing a little bit of coaching with the national team, but we couldn't get together anyway. So everything was on pause. And that then created what I'm doing now, 4 or 5 years later. But it came from everyone kind of going through this thing, me capturing that in a book, and then organic contact from coaches all over the world in different sports.
Something that you're hitting on is obviously at the core of the book, The Tough Stuff, and something that you describe in it is the weight of leadership and just and the weight being kind of from multiple different sources and things like that. But I'm curious now, we've spent a little bit of time unfolding kind of where seeds were planted for you, and then how you kind of brought to a close your traditional sport coaching background to now step into this space of being a coach of elite head coaches. For you now, with some of the coaches that you're continuing to have conversations with and working with, if we were to kind of pinpoint or put the microscope under that weight of leadership, what are you seeing most often right now in this emotional landscape for modern coaches?
So the way that I describe the weight in the book is still true, right? Like I believe this firmly, and it just gets reiterated for me almost in every conversation that I have, that people have it wrong when they ascribe it to being like the weight of expectations. That's what it's always described as. What's expected of you, and so it seems to create this or manifest this weight that seems to appear on the shoulders of coaches, and their hair goes grey and all these kind of things. In elite sport, it's not expectation. Like, no one has greater expectations than the head coach of themselves. So the outside world still pales into their own expectations. And so it's not necessarily that. What I ascribe it to is the weight of caring for the players and everything that swirls around them, and kind of having to care pretty deeply and know girlfriends' names, boyfriends' names, wives' names, kids' names, what those kids are doing for their sport. When you start to like balloon out who you have to care about, and contracts, and having to trade players that means that their kids are going to have to be pulled out of school and moved across the country. Like, there's an enormous emotional toll that goes with that when you care. And that's the weight that I describe. And I think, to answer your question, is that's really been magnified probably since the COVID period, where in particular the family dynamics of coaches has really had or maybe come under the microscope a lot more around. You hear a lot of coaches talk about wanting to be present for their own children, and you hear about them not taking jobs because it means their wife's going to have to leave their job. Just things that you've never really seen in elite sport before. And then on top of that is, you get into just the general fatigue of the role, the commercial landscape, the fear that comes with saying one wrong thing means you're on the front page of the New York Times, and the general changing landscape, but that's always going to be a changing landscape in that sense. But yeah, the family side of sport and maybe the irony of building this thing that you call a family in a locker room whilst not taking care of your own family has maybe come into the forefront of people's minds a little bit more. And it weighs heavily on a lot of coaches. They know and appreciate the fact that they're away all the time.
When it comes to, I think it's a really important distinction that you describe in terms of it not just being a weight of expectations and how so much of that is it never really exceeds that individual's own expectations of themselves, and it's really more of a weight of carrying. Part of that is there's just a sheer amount of people that kind of come under the purview of a head coach or any coach, and so there's a lot of people that are coming to them for things. And it's with that as well, like part of the challenge is when you feel like it all sits on your shoulders, that weight also starts to feel even more maybe crippling as well. So what what are ways and or manners in which you approach conversations with coaches to kind of help them maybe distribute that weight either more appropriately or in a healthier way for them to show up as their best self?
Mm. Yeah, so my work being exclusive to head coaches is for a particular reason. One, I've always been fascinated by head coaching, and so I tend not to work with like assistant coaches and people that are still developing their craft. I'm interested in the one position, and so a lot of my conversations and maybe work and projects and things that I do with coaches is around that role and the obligations of that role. And a big part of that is, to your point around what's being delegated, why. Has that person been set up for success, or has it just been dumped on their desk? So it's going to come back and create more work for everyone and wait and more text messages at night. And right, there's like systems at play here that you can actually get into when you're just talking about the responsibilities of the role. It has nothing to do with the person, but just like how we're setting up the role that can really free up time, energy, space, weight from people. You start to see clarity come back. It seems less cloudy. You start to see confidence come back. You start to see them be able to identify for themselves opportunities to get another advantage over here, some more time back in this little space. Right, and so, but someone's got to help them lift that initial cloud. Rather than be one that contributes to the cloud getting grayer and darker and stormier, which is kind of most of the world that they live in. So a lot of my work revolves around their position and how do you best operate in this position. And part of that is like delegating responsibilities or being okay with delegating responsibilities or reframing being away from home, right? And this is a big one I've been on recently with coaches that are away. Is it is also valuable for your children to see you strive to do something very difficult. So to rob them of that opportunity is also detrimental to their development, right? If it's framed for them as mummy or daddy are away trying to be the best in the world at something, that's a different conversation to like mummy or daddy are away at the office, just kind of because they don't really want to come home, right? Like there's a different conversation for a kid to be able to absorb. Mummy or daddy are like trying to be in the top 0.01% of something in the world. And now they're watching differently. And so that's a bit of reframing that can also take take place that, again, maybe helps remove some of that strain on the leader in particular.
I think it's important, and I love that reframe. I love the example because I think to your point, it's certainly not just about distributing it to other people and delegating things like that. It's also sometimes about how do we change our own relationship with our thoughts or what we're feeling, our emotions, or a circumstance or an opportunity, and so on, and how that can be freeing in its own way or lift some of that burden that we sometimes will tack on for different reasons. And so I love that distinction. There's something else that you shared that I think is really interesting, and I don't know that I have a concrete question around this yet, but you mentioned, I think a lot of people who are now either stepping in this space or anybody that's doing any sort of coaching work, whether you coach coaches, whether you coach um, mental performance coaches, whether you coach salespeople, whoever, sometimes people will get so caught up in because we know how valuable coaching can be to help somebody, we sell that, like we just emphasize the heck out of coaching as a whole. Something that I think you said in there that I think is really important is also helping create a vision for people of the destination that you can help guide them towards. So coaching maybe is the vehicle, but the destination as to where we hopefully want to get to you is a space of you're more confident, a space of having more clarity, a space of having maybe more opportunities, a space of having more for freedom and fulfillment, more presence at home, and so on. um, so with that, I'm curious, within those that you serve, what are some of those destinations per se, or outcomes, whichever term you feel most comfortable with, that you feel like coaches are really striving towards that and that kind of propel them to want to work with you, again, you being a vehicle or the tour guide in the vehicle as they drive the car um, to that destination.
Mm. Well, you came up with a concrete question, and it's a great
Yeah.
one.
Thanks for sticking with me because I get long-winded as I'm thinking through these things off the cuff.
Well,
So I appreciate, hopefully it made sense.
you've worked with people doing at the top of their industry. Like when baseball players say, when you say to baseball players, like, describe to me the feeling of you at your optimum, what do they say? Like, what state do they say that they're in?
They describe flow, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
freedom, trust.
yeah, yeah. And when we say to them what we can help them achieve is often the state of playing free, isn't it? And we use terms like kind of childlike, and you're being in the front yard, and kind of all these different, um, again, maybe vehicles to describe to them a state that they're trying to achieve. That's what I would say, and I wrote a little bit about this in my third book. The optimum state when you ask coaches is what I call coaching free, and it's that you know. Um, Coaching is an exchange of humanity, right? Like, it works, the actual vehicle of it works in that part of my humanity comes across in what I'm either asking you or suggesting that you might want to do. Um, you could read that off a piece of paper and it wouldn't have the same effect as me saying it to you, because part of my humanity comes across in that, right? And then vice versa, it's an exchange. So I get some back from you. So it's a very human interaction. And so, um, again, like, we're really dealing with like human states in that, um, and so I think the objective of all of what I do is to create that state of. Personally, I don't like flow. Doesn't actually fit very well with coaching. Like, with mental work, this is getting technical, but the description of flow isn't the greatest when you're doing kind of what we do, like high performance knowledge work. However, we can use that term as a catch-all. But when coaches are using all of their human skills, when they're when they're able to um, pay attention to something in particular and see that, you know, the offensive lineman isn't blocking with his full pinky finger, and that's the difference between a defensive lineman getting past him, or his foot's in the wrong spot, or his foot starts in the wrong spot. When they're like noticing and aware and conscious and like plugged into that, again, it's this human state, right? And then we ask them to like communicate that, and we know that communication feels better when you've got like a state of clarity and you feel free, and you describe it, and then, you know, decision making is the same, right? And so the reason I bring up like humanity is you start to see these coaches come to life with just like human skills, just things that really are being deployed against coaching, or coaching athletes, or describing the game to athletes, or teaching the game, or whatever you want to say. But we're really using like the core of who we are as people and the core of our like human abilities. That's what I see come to life when you really like free up a coach. And that's great because they need that for their athletes, because that's what they're giving to their athletes as well, is humanity.
When you start working with a coach, whether it's questions that you pose directly or you invite them to reflect on in advance before they sit down with you, again, to help them get to this space of clarity around not only where they want to go, but also maybe what's keeping them from achieving those things. What are some of those kind of core questions that you feel like really help a coach start to get clarity around um, that path that they're on and where they're headed and what's kind of getting in the way?
Mm. Yeah, I have the same three questions that I ask at the start. And um, again, I wrote a chapter in Second Set of Eyes about this. So anyone who's read that would have seen them. But I ask, what are you hoping to achieve? Who are you hoping to be while you achieve it? And what's in the way right now? And what's remarkable is it's very difficult for people to answer those three questions, for the head coach to answer those three questions. So, you know, they can come up with some answer, but often it's like kind of a bit of a surface level. And so it's not just asking them, it's really digging around in that. Like, is that a strong enough goal? Like, are you sure that's really the goal? You know, so we've got a goal orientation in amongst there. What are you hoping to achieve? An identity orientation. Who do you want to be while you achieve it? And then, again, a barrier orientation. And so when you dig around in those, I've found that you can start to really understand someone pretty quickly with three questions like that. And then also be able to chart a course very quickly forward. What's in the way right now? Well, how do we go and move that so that we can start to see some initial progress? You know, coaching is typically a slow process to see the real results, but it doesn't mean that you can't move something right away so that for them even, it feels like they're progressing and moving in the right direction rather than stagnant. So those are my three questions, and there might be better ones. But to kick off, I guess, me and my style and what I'm interested in and what the role requires, those tend to be the ones that I go after.
There's a colleague who's doing some work that I know within this realm of coaching some different sport executives, and they talk about how they only will do at least 12-month, kind of working relationships and things like that. And part of the thing that he was describing to me is why he's so committed to that is because not that they can't produce these short-term benefits and results quicker than that, but to your point, there's also this sustainability piece and this commitment piece over the long haul. And it's not just about, it's just like what we think about with players. It's one thing to repeat a great performance once or twice. It's another thing to sustain it over the course of a season, over the course of a career. So within all that, I appreciate that sentiment. So one of the things I could see potentially, and I don't know if this is your experience or not, how when it comes to more of the short term, wanting to like get results quickly, I'd imagine that a lot of that gets tied into the barriers. How do I get these barriers out of my way? Like that's probably where I would imagine, at least that's the coaches that I work with, that's where a lot of them want to jump to. So for you, how do you find that balance of, hey, let's not jump to like, yes, let's get some solutions and help you start to develop some things that can produce results and transformation and things in the short term. And also, let's also find this balance of building this robust identity. Or you mentioned the goal, like it also sounds like having really clear meaning behind why you're pursuing that goal as well. Like, how do you, I guess, find that balance with coaches in your one-on-one work with them?
Mm. Yeah, the way that I describe it is the way that I describe it to coaches is, in a bit of a similar way. I'm like, look, the way you get big biceps isn't by just going, to the gym once every couple of weeks and then you magically have big biceps, right? The way that it works is you work at it and do curls for like 6 months. And then one day you look in the mirror and you're like, oh shit, like I've kind of got some definition of my biceps, right? And so the work doesn't always show up immediately. But um, yeah, to answer your question, there's two things here. Is one, um, obviously the the uh, the long term benefit of transformation, of structural change, of development, those are clear. And I think you can always chart a course to them. Part of the unique reality of head coaching is the short termism of the fact that they need results now also guides you that way, in that if we're looking to do this elaborate 1 year, 3 year project that delivers them to some sort of transformation, then they could lose their job next week. And so really, to answer your question is describing both of those to the coach is like, look, we're going to chart a course, and typically I work with coaches over a long period of time. I help them transition out of jobs, interview, right? Like I come from human resources as my background. Like I spent a long time in like job interviews and things like that, and help them go back into it and build something else. And so I have a long-term view on it as well, but the reality is like I can't sit in the long-term view camp, given if it needs to work this week and we need to make the playoffs, then it needs to work this week. Otherwise they're out of a job and I'm out of a job. So we often have those conversations up front that it's probably going to jump between those two categories when it's required. But obviously the long-term view is that it works, and that creates the transformation over a long period of time, and they're able to have sustained success. But you don't get to even attempt that unless you have short-term success in this job.
Perhaps this is a good entry point into, something that I've appreciated, and this came up in our conversation that we had last month when we got together is, you know, and there's different terms that people like to use. Some people talk about having a framework, some people talk about having a model, some people talk about designing a system for how they coach, how they guide somebody, and so on. And so there's maybe some language differences here, but one thing that I've appreciated that you described is that there's these kind of four main maybe buckets or crafts, if you will, that are essential for coaches to develop. And I know this is something that you do talk a lot about in the book, and then also it shows up in your newsletter and so on. But I would be curious to have you maybe kind of give maybe a little bit of an overview for those, and in the actual coaching work that you do, are certain ones showing up more so or less so than others? I'm sure they all show up, but which ones, yeah, show up more or less?
Mm. Yeah. This probably goes back to that 2019 presentation, really, like talking about the coach as a performer and drawing parallels to athletes as performers. Is like what we have is a really well defined model or framework of like what that athletic performance is and requires. And obviously that changes, and there's, you know, regular season and playoffs, and there's like all these different factors that go into that. And we've kind of measured and found ways to create systems around like what's known. And I just didn't see that replicated in coaching. Like no one was able to describe what a coach actually does. And so my craft model kind of came off the back of that, of like, well, if I'm going to say we need to be a performer, I need to know what the performance is. And so yeah, it led to, you know, there's four buckets, if you will, but I kind of display them as four overlapping circles, and they all interact. And I'll maybe come back to why that is. But you know, there's your personal craft, right, which is you, your worldviews, your views on leadership, who you are, your family, like all the dynamics that have shaped you as a person. There's organizational craft, which is your kind of understanding of the organization and how to organize, and departments and information flow and budgets and all these kind of things. Locker room craft, which is kind of your culture, right? The off-field stuff with the players, your meetings, your interventions, your planning of things with the team. And then there's game, which is, you know, how you're teaching the game, how you're coming up with a competitive idea about what it's going to take for this team to achieve their goals. And so personal, organizational, locker room, and game. The reason that I display them as four overlapping and interconnected circles is that it's not just about creating this new framework that's like four isolated pillars and nothing touches or has any sort of interconnectedness. That's a really poor way of describing this role and the head coaching role, or just elite leadership in general. Is the reality is everything is overlapping, interconnected, and there are relationships between every single decision, every single message that is sent, everything that happens within that organism touches other areas. And that complexity is something that I think it's worthwhile capturing, because, you know, one decision that you make maybe in the organizational craft probably knocks on to maybe two, maybe the other three areas. And so you can actually kind of start to draw out the ramifications of like every decision that's made in an organization, and understand the complexity that we're actually dealing with. And so, yeah, it was this like kind of search for what actually is the performance, and then looking at ways that was described, not thinking they were good enough, and just trying to build something that I find to be fit for purpose. And it may only be fit for purpose in that when I'm working with a coach on a particular issue, I can kind of show it to them as a starting point and say, okay, this kind of sits here, right? It's a locker room area, but let's have a think through, like, does it knock on to the organizational elements? Does it knock on into the game? Is it going to impact how you play? Is it going to impact you personally? And so it might even just be a starting point. It's fine, but it gives us an entry point to really start to understand the ramifications and the potential future things that we might run into. Because one of the things with leadership is you kind of need to be able to tell the future.
I think that's so where I'd actually like to go. I'll maybe kind of jump off of that a little bit because I think one of the spaces that I was interested in exploring is kind of okay, what do you see being the future in this space in terms of leadership, in terms of coaching, and also how we might start to rethink and redesign almost like the developmental pathway for coaches in essence. Like I'm picturing those four circles that are interconnected and thinking about traditional forms of coach education and coach development and how it gets approached. And some of it certainly has a ton of value. And there's also certain things that um, I think yourself and others are starting to maybe reshape how we're also thinking about that. And so this is going to be an incredibly loaded question that we probably could have spent the rest of the time just on this one thing. But when you think about those four crafts and those circles and how they're all interconnected, when you start to think about redesigning maybe the development pathway for coaches, head coaches, how what would go into that for you? You know, what are things you would add? What are things that you think need to be removed, reshaped? That's such a loaded question. So if I need to get into more nuance there, I'm happy to. But I think it's so, I love the framework, I love the model, and I think it's just a really nice set, uh, it sets the stage not only for your individual work, but I'd imagine this could not only be beneficial for others getting coaching in the one-on-one space, but also those that are organizations that are trying to produce better coaching performance.
Yeah, and it needs to work as a whole, doesn't it? Like there needs to be an educational component to it, and then I call my work coaching performance, right? Like which sits on top of the educational, the coach education, and then you have like the kind of what is like on the job learning and development, and yeah. So look, what I'm what I'm really optimistic about and bullish about in coaching is that I think we've got more to give. Like, I think there's some really good work being done. I think there's some really solid coaching, but I think we're in about third gear. And where I think the remaining performance is actually within us, like as human beings. And I talk a lot about like humans and humanity and everything. And it's not because I'm kind of cosmic and trying to be a bit airy fairy, but I really do believe in human potential. And I believe in the idea that when we start to really uncover and unlock human potential, is there's gears 4, 5, and 6 are there. Um, and, like I, um, and so like in terms of like designing systems that account for that, I think that's one portion of it. And again, I think there's a reframing element, right? Like I'll give you an example. So when we describe passion in coaching, generally it comes out when it's just a coach like yelling at someone or something, right? Stomping up and down the sideline and like yelling. That seems to be the only way we can describe what constitutes a passionate coach. Now, think about how narrow that is as an idea. That the only thing of all of the human ways of like describing passion, the only way we seem to be competent or like convinced of is that it's like shouting and pointing. And then we go, oh, geez, they're passionate. That can't be the case. We don't use that rubric in any other domain, right? Like it's not how you describe someone who's passionate about music. It's not how you describe someone who's passionate about video games. It's like there's just, it's very narrow. And this is what I mean. Like I think there's just more in us. There's more complexity. There's more color. There's more vibrance. There's more excellence there's more elegance that lies within us if we're willing to kind of expand it out a little bit. Now, how we design systems around that is there's a couple of ways, but I'll give you some obvious ones. The only way to learn how to coach is to coach. It's like stand-up comedy. You can watch every episode of comedians in cars getting coffee, and to a person, they will say, I admire you because I might not actually like your jokes, but I admire that you got up on stage and did the thing. And it's the same in coaching. It's like the only way to learn it is to get up and do it. And then for the most part, people go, I might not agree with your coaching, but I'll admire that you got up and you did it. And we've got to find more opportunities in our development pathways for coaches to coach and coaches to have their own teams and for coaches to coach the whole game. And that might be that it's at a volunteer level at a high school or a primary school, or there needs to be more opportunities for coaches to coach. So I think that comes before the education piece. In terms of like opportunity and priority, is how do you prioritize getting more coaches coaching and more coaches coaching more of the game and like understanding rather than specializing earlier. And then secondly is like within the education system, again, I would point to the personal craft and really helping coaches understand themselves and all of the different factors that layer into why they believe what they believe about the world, about humanity, about people, about teams, about performance, about potential, about different cultures. That's all valuable for them. And it is basically not touched on at all in any education. And then I'd say the other one that's missing still is the organizational craft. And most coaches to this day don't know that they're working for a real estate company, not a sports franchise. And that is a bit of a problem. And then also the thought that doing one mock interview with the general manager where you have to campaign for them to sign a player that you want is not adequate training. So there's some immediate ones there, but yeah, I think there's more in us. I think we need to put that into the education system. I think we need to train people like the organizational stuff because the organizations have become so big, and we need to get coaches coaching because you got to stand up on stage and deliver some jokes and find out if the audience laughs.
I think this is something you speak about in Where Others Won't, that book, and it's something that I know has shown up in other forms of content and resources and things that you've created and shared, is the importance of almost view it like cross-pollination, where you can draw lessons, parallels, and things from other domains. There's, I think, a lot to learn about becoming a quality coach or becoming a quality leader that you can pull from other industries. Um, and you mentioned too, even just having like your HR background and how that also can show up in different ways and certain things that you help guide coaches with. Are there certain domains and avenues that you enjoy kind of pointing coaches towards to learn from and to study from? And if there's any, maybe one or two examples that you feel like show up more often than not in your conversations with them?
Yeah, I'm really fortunate in that for most of my life, I've kind of worked alongside my coaching, and I've worked in HR, I've worked in sales, I've worked in technology. So like a lot of my frameworks, and again, like my personal craft, a lot of my ideas around meetings and like the sales process of working with a player or a team and just understanding people comes from those backgrounds. So the business parallels are obvious, so I won't harp on those. Um, I I haven't traditionally liked this cross pollination, but it was Mark Shapiro put me on a kick of the military books. Last time we spoke, I said, "What are you reading?" And he said, "I've gotten off like autobiographies and things, and I'm on to a lot of the military books." So um, I think what you see in those is the contemporary ones, and it's not necessarily just kind of like Jocko and just like be extreme with it all. Is when you read like McChrystal and McRaven and these guys who are the real leaders of um, essentially the entire kind of war effort, is an exceptional amount of levels of thought and intent that are far beyond anything that anyone imagines about the military. And here's a couple of examples for you. Was I wrote in one of my books about this, but even the fact that like napping has been like written into the army guidebook, and like how to nap on the battlefield, the durations to nap, why you're napping, because it creates a clarity, a regeneration of like your empathy, your ability to have attentional capacity, like kind of that being written in kind of goes against the typical idea of like the soldier, right? Where it's just going to be out there for 72 hours and we're not going to sleep and we're going to trudge through quicksand and we're going to shoot the bad guys and we're going to get out of there. And they've moved away from that. I think it was like Lieutenant Barnes is quoted as saying, it's the combat is a thinking man's game. And so to think that we can think straight without sleeping well is silly. They're just not things that you traditionally hear about or conceptualize with the military. And there's another one that's in Team of Teams by Stanley McChrystal, where, and I send this to so many people, and he's talking about the BUDS training with the Navy SEALs. And if you don't know what BUDS training is, like you've probably heard of Hell Week. Hell Week comes from BUDS, like the training program that they put all the SEALs through. And he says it's not designed to create super soldiers, it's designed to create super teams. Now, no one conceptualizes it like that. No one even thinks of any of the special forces about like the whole system being designed around team development. They hear the stories on the podcasts of like I failed the first time, I got through, and it was me, 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 me. You hear the me stories, and then here's the leader that comes out and says, actually, you get punished if you're ever seen without your buddy. You can't walk to the mess hall without your buddy. The punishments that you do, like the sit-ups in the waves, even they are easier when you have a teammate with you. The whole thing, including the punishments, are designed around teams. And so again, like maybe once I got over my initial hurdle of sport isn't war and all this kind of stuff, to see the intent behind what particularly the US military have built, the resources they put behind it, the thinking that they put behind it, the neuroscience that they're putting into like skill development. There's a lot there that I think we could learn from, because they're the cutting edge of it. And they've actually, I think, surpassed. I think sport used to be that, and I think the military have probably surpassed us in that. Since they made their changes to how they were approaching combat.
A thread that I think really stands out in that example that you bring is the word maybe intentional, right? The intentionality behind in so many facets. Like I think the military is a great example of the intentionality of a system when it comes to selection, when it comes to development, when it comes to team, like building teams and how do they, the makeup, like the composition of teams and so on down the line. Like I think that word intentional comes up so much. And I think it's also something that I think I really appreciated about your work was how as a coach, as a leader, in essence, you can start to understand that when you shine the mirror on yourself and the importance of you yourself being intentional in your own craft, in your own development, in your own growth, in your own performance. So I think that's it's cool to kind of hear those examples because I think the military does get referenced a lot, and those are maybe examples that people always catch or notice first.
Yeah, I've got another personal one as well. I met one of the Green Berets who was one of the first to parachute into Afghanistan, and I said, what was that like? And he said, we'd done a lot of preparation uh, to do that. And I said, what did that look like? And he said, we knew, we didn't really know what we were getting ourselves into, but we knew small details like the coarseness of the sand. I was like, well, why is that relevant? He said, because it impacts the socks and the goggles that we have. Now, again, the level of like intentionality to know that the courses of the sand is to do with making sure you have the right socks and the right goggles so that the sand doesn't get in your shoes and the sand doesn't get in your eyes. That is a level of intentionality um, that is incredible. And again, I think it's not about this, and this is checking my own thinking. It really isn't about this like sport isn't war thing. It's about how do you create intentional systems to do things like that, or do like completely batshit crazy things like to fly two Black Hawk helicopters into a compound in Pakistan and shoot someone and get everyone out, in darkness and like just off the charts difficult, but still being able to go, yeah, but if we're really intentional about it, we can plan for it and achieve it. I think those are worthwhile lessons for all of us, whether in sport or within the organizations that we're working in, that we can actually strip out those lessons.
We're kind of coming down to the end. I feel like this hour, at least for me, has gone quickly in a lot of ways. And what I'd like to kind of do is end with just a couple of questions because I know when I think about your books and the work that you share, both on social platforms through your newsletter and so on, the word like depth comes up a lot for me. Like I think there's a lot of like depth and like it's not from it's like almost like it balances depth with simplicity, which I think is a form of brilliance. So I'm gonna give you your flowers here for a brief moment, but those are the things that came up when I was reading through your books and I come across your ideas and things like that. So I say all that from the standpoint of like there was so much we could obviously have covered in this conversation, on any of your books, any themes. And yet I also know that maybe in this given moment there might be certain things that are more top of mind for you that you're seeing, that you're experiencing, that you're excited about. So I kind of want to just use one more maybe open-ended question here to, knowing that there's a large number of coaches that tune into this show and are engaged in these conversations with guests like yourself. If you had in essence that we can call it the billboard question, hey, if you could share one thing with that particular audience, like what's maybe most top of mind for you right now in your work that you think it would be helpful for coaches out there to hear and or be reminded of?
Yeah, it might actually be a bit of a culmination of the whole conversation that we've had around asking for help and maybe some kind of like misconceptions and and pairing it with like what I do and some of the work that you do. Like I think if you're sitting here wondering like why coaches would have a coach, or you're intrigued but you're not quite sure, or you maybe fall into the category of like thinking that coaching is kind of for people that are underperforming, or it's only for young developing coaches, I'd say you might want to rethink that. Like I think the biggest misconceptions I've seen on my journey over the last 5 years of doing this is that we tend to think that being coached is only for people that are inexperienced or underperforming or unsuccessful. And what I point to is, I can rattle off some names for you. some coaches that you might have heard of. Pep Guardiola, just a pretty like kind of unsuccessful like Spanish coach in soccer. Hasn't really done much. Emma Hayes hasn't really done much in her lifetime either. Closer to home, it's like Sean McVeigh. Hasn't really done much in his short time. Sandy Brondello hasn't really done only a couple of WNBA titles to her name as a head coach. But like these are the top of the top. They are experienced. They are successful, and they specifically are looking to coaching to continue to get better. And so there's kind of two elements to that. I think is that they're already brilliant and they're getting better. And so I think again and they're already experienced and they're getting more experience because their experience is being accelerated by someone who's paying attention to them. And so, yeah, I think if you're on the fence, the first people have already gone through the wall, and I think that's very compelling if I were to just look at it as an outsider. And so, again, I think it's starting to emerge more as a bit of a mainstream practice. But if you're on the fence about it, I'd urge you to try it because it's not about saying that you're unsuccessful or you're just developing or you need more experience or that you've got shortcomings at all. It's like all coaching, it's actually about accelerating and heightening the potential that kind of lives within you already. And so, yeah, if you're a coach that's listening to this, or you're a performance psychologist, or you're a CEO, or you're whatever you are, coaching is the greatest accelerator of human performance. And so it's not this thing that just kind of fixes broken people. It makes amazing people even more amazing.
That's great. I love too how you brought it full circle back to the story that you shared going back to 2020 and getting to that point of asking for help. And yeah, again, just sometimes that's the hardest thing for somebody. But again, having these wonderful examples that and you just rattled off a handful of what is a very quick and growing list. And that's also just like we're just borrowing even too from some that have been outspoken about it. Obviously, there's certainly many out there that are doing it,
There's many that you don't
behind the
know.
scenes, yeah, with
Yeah.
like somebody like yourself. So I think it's exciting to see how that continues to grow in so many ways. And so where I'd actually like to conclude, Cody, is a question that I do pose to everybody, but it's whether this is in your work, personal, whatever, you can kind of take it however you'd like. But what's something that you're proud of that maybe you don't always get an excuse to talk about?
Oh, my kids. Yeah. No, I've got two little boys. I've got a almost 4-year-old and almost 1-year-old. And uh, talk about my own personal development and understanding of the world and understanding of human beings and understanding of skill development and understanding of coaching is it's all been completely revamped by those two little boys. And so, yeah, they are my greatest teachers, maybe mentors, even in a weird way. But yeah, best thing that's ever happened to me. And yeah, I don't talk about them enough, but yeah, if you've got kids, I'm sure you'll know, like it's the greatest coach development you could ever wish for. Um, and so, yeah, they've made me come to life since we had our first, and now I've got a second, and so yeah, uh, Ollie and Oscar, yeah, they're my greatest personal development by far.
I think it's a beautiful way to bring the conversation here to a close, and I empathize with that on a number of levels, Cody. So I appreciate you not only sharing a little bit of the behind the scenes work that you're doing for so many. I obviously the resources that you've created and that you continue to put out there. I've shared with so many coaches. I'm going to continue to share with coaches out there, and I hope others take some time if they're not already familiar with it to explore, because I think there's, again, going back to that word depth, there's so much more depth and practicality and simplicity, I think, in any of your books, your newsletter. Am I missing any other core ways that people maybe can learn from you? I know those are some
I,
core ones.
I did have a podcast also called Where Others Won't for about 3 years. When we had our first son, that went dormant. So there isn't anything since about 2021, but or 2022. But they were meant to be evergreen. They're very much about modern leadership, and so you can actually go back and listen. There's about 91 episodes, I think. So about 100 hours of me talking if you want to sit through that. But yeah, that's the other one. But yeah, books, newsletter, and please reach out to me too if you can jump on codyroyle.com and it links straight to my email address. So anyone can please do email me and it comes to me, and I'm happy to talk about anything in this or any ideas that other people have as well.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you being gracious with your time, not only for others, but also selfishly with me for the last hour or so. So again, Cody, I appreciate it, and I'm excited for our next conversation and next opportunity to kind of collaborate. So thank you again for taking some time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Zach.